Hello, this is Carson Winter again, and this time I will be covering the 2023 Mathematics District Test. Unfortunately, our copy of the test is a little out of order sometimes, so I'll try to account for that. But anyway, I should be able to answer all the questions on the test in a way that you can hopefully understand. Let's begin. Number one, after math practice on Thursday, all-day math team drove to Whataburger. Principal gave them $50. They ordered 5 cheeseburgers, and it costs 7.85 plus tax. This is the tax rate, and apple pie costs that much plus tax. How many apple pies could they get? Okay, first off, you got to figure out how much money they have left to spend on apple pies. So the $50 they gave them minus the 5 cheeseburger combos, then times the sales tax of 0.0825 plus the original, so 1.0825. Multiply by that, then you should have a small amount of money left that you can spend on apple pies, which have a price with tax included of $1.25 times your tax rate. And if you do that and round up, you will get a value of 5. Or sorry, you have to round down. My bad. Because you cannot buy more or fractional pies. Pay for some new calculators. Uh, they perform an SHS. I don't know what that is. Student tickets cost that much. Adult tickets cost that much. They raise this much money selling this many tickets. How many adult tickets are sold? Okay, we are going to be using a matrix to solve a two-variable linked equation. So one student tickets plus the number of adult tickets have to be equal to 372 tickets. So put that into these data into matrix. Then you go to, then each student ticket was worth $15. Each adult one was worth $25, and they raised 7,700 tickets. So if you go to matrix, put that data in, then go to math and scroll up until you see RF. Put in the matrix, you'll get an adult ticket value of 212. 3. This line contains these 2 points. Line L2 is parallel to L1 and contains this point. The y-intercept of L2 is that. What is the value of B? Okay, so you got to first off store this data into L1 and use it. And use a linear regression to store it into y1. Now you have a line. So you got to figure out what's the discrepancy between L1 and L2 at this negative 12. You'll see that I believe L1 is around like 15 and a third over L2 at that point, which means L2, since they're parallel, is 15.3 less than L1 on any given value. So then you go for L1 of 0, find that value, and then you subtract the difference that we came, or add the difference depending on how you calculated it. And if you do that, you get negative 20. 4. Tao rents a car at the airport. The airport cost him $20. Also charged $25 per day and $0.5 per mile. If Tao used his car for 5 days and paid that much, how many miles did he drive? Well, let's figure out how much of the money he spent on miles. So the whole thing minus the $20 up front, and then minus 25 times the 5 for the day cost for using it for 5 days. Then you divide it by the mile cost to get the total number of miles he drew at 175. Okay, Anthony can wash and wax a car in 45 minutes, and Jacob needs 1 hour to do it. If Anthony works by himself for 2 hours before being joined by Jacob, how much time will it take them to wash 16 cars? I'll be doing this in terms of minutes. So basically what's going on is after Anthony works for 2 hours by himself, his rate is 1 car over 45 minutes. So 120 minutes times that 1 over 45 is how much has completed before they both start. So that's what this is here. And they have 16 minus that number of cars left. And then Anthony's rate, like we mentioned, is 1 over 45, and Jacob's is 1 over 60. And those have to be multiplied by some amount of time to wash this number of cars over here. And if you do that, you'll get around 5 hours and 43 minutes worth. And then you have to add 120 minutes because this takes place after the 2 hours Anthony worked by himself. Okay, next. 6, the value of Warif's house increases by that much per year. His house is worth that much on 2023. How much is it worth in 2035? Well, this value acts as an exponent, the 9.35%. So 1.0935 powering to the number of years that have passed. That's how exponentials work. So in this case, it would be 2035 minus 2023, and that is multiplied by the original value right here. If you do that, you get 1,104,885. 7. If the value of the roots of these functions are a and b, then a plus b over ab is equal to what? Well, the sum of the roots can be given by negative this value over negative b over a. So negative 14 over 7 is a plus b. And then a times b is equal to this c value, the product of the roots. C, because it's the last term, it's being multiplied by constants, or your constant roots, and then dividing by that 7 again. So if you simply put 14 over 7 over negative 105 over 7, you'll get a 0.13 repeating. Okay, the graph y of h of x begins at the point 0, 0, h of 121. Well, if you look at this graph, you can clearly see what x is equal to 9, y is equal to negative 3, x is equal to 16, y is equal to negative 4, x is equal to 25, y is equal to negative 5. This equation is negative square root of x. So simply plug 121 into that and you get negative 11. Okay, if g of x is the inverse function of h of x, find the domain. Okay, for that to be the domain of g of x, since it's the inverse, is going to be the range of h of x, or the possible y values. And as you can see, the y values can go from 0 to negative infinity. So that's why the answer is E. Number 10, the number of 2-liter Cokes sold at Walmart each month varies inversely with the price. In a month when the price was $1.80, they sold 3,448 2-liter Cokes. The price is reduced to that much the next month. What is the expected number of Cokes sold? Well, since it's inversely related, that means you have some constant value dividing by that price to get you 3,448 Cokes sold. And then once you find that K value, you divide it by 1.2 because the new price is 1.2, and you figure out how many Cokes are expected to be sold, which is 5,172. Okay, consider this isosceles triangle. EF is the median, BC is equal to B is equal to 12, and BAD is equal to 80 degrees. Okay, draw the line EC and find the area of this triangle. Okay, first off, since it's an isosceles triangle, you are guaranteed that this angle plus this angle up here has to add up to 180 degrees. Now, that means that this angle over here must be 100. Then you can use the equation for the area of a triangle, which is this side over 2 times sine of this angle right here. So 12 squared times sine of 100 over 2 gets you 70.9. Find the area of trapezoid ABCD. Well, you got to figure out that you have two things you need to figure out, this bottom base and the height. You know this angle is 90, and because this is the median, you know AE is equal to 12. Let me just mark that real quick. That means that the hypotenuse can be imagined to be 24. So if you need to find the height, it is sine of 80 times that 24, as you can see right here. And then you also need to figure out this base down here. Well, you know that cosine of 80 times the hypotenuse will get you the difference between the horizontal difference between A and B, as you can see there, and it's dual-sided, so you need to do it twice. And then you still have the 12 left over in the middle. So cosine of 80 times 24 and times 2 because of that dual-sidedness, and the plus 12 because of this 12 right here. Then you add another 12, representing this base up here, and then divide by 2 to take the average of the two bases. And then you multiply it by that height we were talking about. And if you do that, you get an area of 382. Consider this circle with this diameter. GH, the measure of minor arc GJ is 110 degrees, and GH is 18. What is the area of sector JOH? Okay, if JG is 110 degrees, that's basically telling you this central angle right here is also 110 degrees. That's what the definition of the measure means in this case. So since these two angles are supplementary, this angle right here is 70 degrees. And then your radius is going to be this diameter, 18 over 2. So you use the area of or you use the part of the circle formula. So your radius squared times pi is normally what your circle would be. And your part of the circle is 70 degrees over the entire 360 degrees of a circle. So if you do that, then you will get 49.5. So this 70 degrees represents 70 out of the 360 degrees in the circle, so that's why you're multiplying by it. The perimeter of GOJ is what? Well, we know GO, we know OJ, and we have this angle, so we can use our SAS program. And then you have to figure out the length of GJ, go to triangle and then SAS, and then input 910 degrees and 9. Figure out this side right here, and then add the two sides that are 9 to get 32.7. 15. Regular hexagon is inscribed in a circle. The area of the circle is that. What is the perimeter of the hexagon? So the area of a circle is r squared times pi. So some r value results in that. And then once you have that, you can kind of imagine the hexagon okay, that's terrible. You can kind of imagine the hexagon like this, where this is part of the this is one of the sides of the hexagon, and the circle would go around like here. So to figure out this value right here, that's part of the hexagon, you need to do sine of this angle right here, and then times your radius, and you have to multiply it by 2 because it's dual-sided. So this angle right here is going to be equal to 180 over the number of sides. You can kind of draw it out yourself if you want to understand why better, and you should be able to. But basically, yeah, it's 180 over your sides, and then you multiply it by your r value to get this value right here. Multiply it by 2 because it's dual-sided, and then multiply by 6 because it's a hexagon. If you do that, you'll get a perimeter of 72. Seeing the area of the three-quarter circle is that, what's the perimeter? Well, in this case, normal area of a circle, r squared times pi. Then multiply by 3 over 4 because it's 3/4 of a circle, and that value is equal to 530. And once you have that, you can go ahead and put that in EQ solver to figure out R. And then once you have that, the perimeter is going to be the circumference value, as you can see right here. The circumference of a circle is normally 2 pi r, but since it's 3/4 of the circle, you multiply by 3/4. And then you also have these two segments of length r there. And if you add those things together, you get a value of 101. Yeah, all right, I will. Sorry, had to talk to my parents. Let's continue. A right circular cone has a radius of this and a total surface area of that. Find the volume of the cone. Well, the surface area of the cone has two attributes, the circle on the bottom of the cone. So area of a circle, as you can see there. And then also the lateral surface area, which is the slant height times the circumference of the circle over 2. So the slant height is going to be figured out through a Pythagorean theorem with an unknown height, which is what we're looking for. So if you imagine the height and you had the radius there, if you did Pythagorean theorem, you get the slant height of the cone. So you get the slant height from that. That's multiplied by your circumference, which would be 2 pi r. And then you divide by 2 because that's what the formula requires. And then that value has to be equal to 462. That will get you some h value, or some x value that represents the height. Then once you have that, you can do the area or the volume of a cone, r squared times pi times your height over 3. If you do that, you'll get a volume of 511. 18, the center of a circle is in quadrant 4, the circumference of the circle is 16 pi. The equation is this. What is the value of A? So this value right here will eventually represent r squared, because that's how circles are represented in rectangular form like this. So you need to figure out what r squared actually is. Well, the circumference is 2 pi r. So divide this by 2 and pi, and you get a radius of 8. So this value right here needs to be equal to 8 squared, or 64. 39 comes from moving this over. So you have your 39. And then if you change y squared plus 8y to y plus 4 all squared, that will create an excess 16 on this side that must be accounted for by adding on this side. So that's where you get this part from. And then the same thing is true for your unknown x value. It will be divided by 2 and then squared to be equal to 64. Plug that in EQ solver and you'll get an A value of -6 or +6, but it can be either. Okay, moving on. Number 28, we probably skipped. Yeah, we skipped a few problems. This is what I was talking about the test being out of order. 3 of the roots of this 4th degree polynomial are these 3 numbers. And what is each of these coefficients added together? So a quirk about these kind of polynomials where everything is rational, square root numbers are irrational, so they must be avoided. And the only way to counteract that is if you have 1 plus or 1 minus some square root of number, you have to do 1 plus or 1 minus the opposite. So 1 minus square root of 5 is counteracted by 1 plus square root of 5 as your 4th root. And then once you do that, you will rewrite the equation in terms of those roots. So you simply do, and then plug in 1, so that all these x values cancel out to be 1. So then you just multiply 1 minus all the roots for all the roots. Then you subtract this 1 that will appear over here to get the value of this coefficient plus this one plus this one plus that one, and get 29. 29. The sound level in decibels is given by this equation. The important thing is the 10 log here, and the fact that intensity is on the top. Andrew is playing his trumpet, producing 88 dB. If 12 other musicians join him, and they all play their trumpet at the same intensity, what's the sound level, all the trumpets playing together? Well, in this case, your I value is multiplied by 16. So you can take whatever I value or whatever sound level you previously had and add it to log at base 13. And you have to multiply it by this 10 out front, because when you're multiplying two numbers inside a log, you get to take one of them out and just add basically log base 13 times whatever intensity Andrew is playing at is equal to log base 13, 10 times base 13 plus 10 times log base of Andrew's trumpet, which is given to be 88. So you simply put that in your calculator and you get a dB of 99. 30 is going to be our Sinu program. Go to Sinu. It should be in miscellaneous. Your low temperature is 12, your high temperature is 29, and your period is 24 hours because it goes from low to high and then low again in 24 hours. And then what's your expected temperature at midnight? That is 12 a.m. Or essentially, what my program does is it asks me for the center or distance from the center. So the center of our times is 11 a.m. So to get to 12 a.m., you have to add 13 hours to get to that. And if you do that, you will get an answer of 13 or 18.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Angle A is in quadrant 2 and angle B is in quadrant 3. If sine of A is that and cosine of B is that, then tangent of A plus B is what? Okay, you could use some double angle identities if you wanted, but I'll take the easier route. First off, you can do sine inverse of 3 over 5 to figure out what possible angle it is. But because it's an angle 2, or quadrant 2, you have to do the equal aspect of that sine of 3 over 5, which is gotten by subtracting that value from 180, because you can imagine the sine of a function looks like this. This is 0, this is 180, and as you can see, any value here can be equivalated with that 180 minus that value. And the similar method is done for cosine. In this case, cosine -5 over 13 is going to get you a negative value, and it is in quadrant 3, the angle. So again, you take essentially the equivalence. This means that how do I put it? Yeah. Basically, yeah, they just, essentially, since it's negative, the cosine of the function would be given like right here. And then the tangent, or then it's basically the opposite of the equivalent angle over here, which because cosine of here is positive, and we know it's in quadrant 3, is what we're looking for. So you do 180 minus that angle to get to this angle right here. A little bit confusing, but you can get it if you understand these kind of things. And then in that case, you simply add those two angles and take the tangent of it and get 0.59. Partial fraction decomposition of this stuff is a over x minus 2 plus b over x plus 3. Okay, there's a quick way to do this. You got to realize is that to create this thing at the bottom, a is multiplied by x plus 3 and b is multiplied by x minus 2. Either way, ax plus bx has to be equal to this 1x over here. So simply remove all the x's and you get a plus b is 1. 33, find the angle between these two vectors. The angle between the vectors is the inverse cosine of the dot product of the vectors over the, I don't remember what exactly it's called, but the length of the vectors. So the Pythagorean 4 squared plus 6 squared for each of them. So in this case, you have 4 times 12 plus -6 times 8 to get the dot product. Then you simply divide it by the Pythagoreans of both of these things. Square root of 16 plus 36, and then square root of 144 plus 64. And then you take the cosine inverse of that to get 1.57. 34, consider this sequence, find the 8th term in the sequence. This is a question about figuring out what the sequence is. If you look closely and convert everything to improper fractions, you will realize that that's 2. You will realize that the equation is basically, or that each number is basically 5 powered to n minus 1 over n minus 1 factorial. So in this case, you want the 8th term, 5 powered to 7 over 7 factorial. Gets you 15.5. 35, a ball is dropped from this height and begins bouncing. Each bounce is 3/4 the height of the previous one, and which bounce is the first in which the height of the bounces is less than 1 foot. So basically, you're wondering when 3 powered to 4 times 6 will be equal to 1. That's called a log base. So you take log base of that 3 over 4, and you put 1 over 6. Because that's the proportion you're looking for. You're looking for it to be 1/6 of the original height of 6 feet to be 1 foot. And if you do that, you have to round up because it can't be any greater than 1 foot. And you'll get a value of 7 bounces until the bounce is like 0.9 feet or something. 45, another time the test is skipping for no reason, because it's dumb, I guess. Find the area in the second quadrant bounded by the x, y, and this equation right here. So if you put that into r of theta, you will see very clearly where you got to understand how polar equations work first, I guess. The pi over 2 causes the equation to point upwards, and pi causes it to point leftwards, kind of like a unit circle. So the area of a polar equation is based on the integral of your two bounds, and then you have to the integral of those two between those two values or bounds of the equation squared, and then you have to divide it by 2. So you simply put that into your calculator, integral from pi over 2 to pi of the equation squared, divide by 2, and you get 34.8. Consider the graph y1 is equal to 12 over x plus 6. Use left rectangle approximation method with 6 rectangles to approximate this area. Okay, we have an approximation program for this. As you can see here, they're using left rectangle approximation, so it's left Riemann's equation. And then your bounds are, where you have 6 rectangles they want, and then starting at x equals 2 and ending at x equals 8. And if you do that, the calculator will give you a value of 5.11. Okay, 47. Find the value when it is revolved around the line y is equal to 12. Well, in this case, you can use Oxor. Why? I don't know why it's like that. I believe it's, yeah, that's how you spell it. Okay. Oxor, yes, because you do have bounds you're looking for. 2, and then 8, and then your line x equals 12. And then you look for the x volume. If your calculator gave you an error, you likely forgot to put y2 into the y2 area. So yeah, your two equations are 12 over x plus 6, and y is equal to 0. Okay, the Panhandle Bee keeps their dining area at this constant rate. They serve their famous coffee at exactly 175 degrees, and it changes at this rate per minute. Darius receives a phone call at the moment his coffee was served, and his coffee cooled for exactly 5 minutes before he took his first sip. What is the temperature of the coffee? Well, in this case, you're given the rates, so the actual change is the integral of that rate to offset it to an actual value from your 0 minutes to 5 minutes. So simply do integral from 0 to 5 of your equation, add your original 175 to it, and you will get a value of 151 degrees. 49, the derivative of this function is given by 2x cubed minus 6x squared plus 2. And which of the following does f have a relative minimum? So minimums happen when the f prime or the derivative is equal to 0. But however, maximums also happen there. For it to be a minimum, the slope must go from being negative to being positive. So therefore, f prime must go from negative to positive. And that happens at these 2 points. However, at this point, it goes from positive to negative and is therefore a maximum instead. 57, skipping again because the test download and stuff we have online is weird. But anyway, random sample of 500 Texas high school students used to estimate the proportion of Texas high school students who participate in UIL academics. What is the maximum margin of error of a 96% confidence interval? So first off, we got to figure out the maximum standard deviation of that interval, which is, or basically the standard deviation of the confidence interval. But so basically that value is going to be equal to some p-value times 1 minus that p-value over the number of people, and then a square root of that value. The highest or the p-value that will create the highest standard deviation is 0.5. So put that 0.5 squared over 500 square root. Then the margin of error is also based on the distance from, or is also based on the standard deviation times the length of the confidence interval. So in this case, you do inverse norm from 0.96 to the center. You can do mean of 0 and standard deviation of 1.1. And you'll get, I believe, like 2.2 on each side or something. So you have to multiply that standard deviation by 2.2 or whatever you got to get this margin of error. 58, random sample of 360 high schools, asked where they want to go. They are in the ratio 3, 3, 4, 2, and you want a 95% confidence interval. So essentially, what you do is this is a chi-square test for independence. So what you do is you take your actual value, subtract it from the expected value, which would be 3 over the total 12 times the 360, so 90. You square it, and then you divide by the expected value. You do that for all of them, so 82 minus 90 squared over 90, 112 minus 120 squared over 120, and so on. And that gives you your x squared value as I like to call it. I don't know if it's technically what you call it. Then you do your x squared CDF of go to distribution basically, and then you do x squared, or your x squared value you got here, a maximum of infinity basically, and your DF is the total number of schools minus 1. And if you do that, you'll get a value of 0.346. 59, 90% of Olympic athletes who have steroids will test positive. 98 who have not been using steroids will test negative. If 10% of Olympic athletes have been using steroids, what percent will test positive? Well, what you have here is 0.1% or 0.1 or 10% of the Olympic athletes have been using steroids, and if that's the case, there will be a 95% chance they get recognized. They also have the chance of a false positive. So there are 0.9 or 90% of Olympic athletes who are not using steroids, and for each of them, there is a 0.02 chance that they will test positive anyway. If you add those together, you'll get a 11.3%. In the Fort Bend School District, this many select high school seniors plan to study computer science, while 21 out of 72 plan to study in college. And you want a 96% confidence interval. And what is the proportion of the, you want the proportion of the difference and whatnot. And then you want the standard error, which is the standard deviation of distance or difference. So in this case, like we discussed before, standard error of a probability is you're going to be your percent chance of it happening, so 16 over 88, times your percent chance of it not happening, 88 minus 16 over 88, divided by your total population size of 88. Then you do the same thing for this 21 over 72. And if you did square root these values like right here, but then you square it again because the combined standard deviation is the square root of standard deviation 1 squared plus standard deviation 2 squared. So the square root and squared are counteracted, and you simply put all this in your calculator and take the square root to get back to the standard deviation and get 0.0675. Okay, let's continue. Number 6, consider a right triangle ABC with measurement of C is equal to 90. Point D lies on AB. CD is perpendicular to AB. AC is equal to 6. AB is equal to 10, meaning that CD is obviously 8 if you use Pythagorean theorem. And find the area of triangle ACD. In this case, we are going to try and figure out this value right here. I already wrote it, but how you would figure out is the value of a given segment is equal to it basically determined by this. The segment, or when there's a right angle here, the segment length times the entire length, so 3.6 times 10, has to be equal to this side length right here squared. That's how you get the 3.6 right here. And then, once you have that, you can find the area of your triangle. Use Pythagorean theorem to figure out this height of 4.8. Height times width over 2, 8.64. Okay, 20, consider this equation right here. If f of 3 is 31, what is b? I'll simply plug in 3 for each of them and solve for b. Into EQ solver, do that. Each x value is 3, so do the corresponding math, and you get a v value of -3. 21, consider 4 consecutive even negative integers in increasing order since the product of the first and the third is 112, 122 greater than the product of -25 and the fourth. Find the sum of the 4 integers. So we will store the first even integer as a variable called x. So we know that x, the first integer, times x plus 4, which would be your third even integer because you add 2 and then add 2 again, has to be equal to -25 times the fourth one, x plus 6. And then it is 122 greater, so add 122. And you'll get an x value of, like, I believe it was negative 22. Yeah, that would make sense. If you get an x value of like -2, there are technically two solutions, but they're all negative, so it can't be like -2. So once you have your value, just add them all together, and you get a value of -100. How many even 4-digit counting numbers are less than 7,000? Well, you can imagine numbers from 0 to 999 are not 4 digits. So you subtract those 1,000 numbers from 7,000. And then of the remaining numbers, half of them are even. So divide by 2, and you get 3,000. The distance from this point to this line is that much. What is the x value of that point? Okay, to do that, we will be converting this equation to standard form. We'll multiply everything by 5 and then bring the x over here. To get 5y minus 3x is equal to 30. Then once you do that, you use this method basically. You multiply the y by the y of your point and the x by the x of your point, and then subtract this value right here, and then you divide it by the square root of this plus this squared plus that squared. So like the Pythagorean result of it. I should really call that something because I will save a lot of my typing, or talking. But in any way, square root of 25 plus 9 is the same as the square root of 34, so they cancel out. So basically, you're looking for 5x, 5 times -12 minus 3 times your unknown minus this 30 that goes over is equal to 66 right here. And if you do that, you'll get an e-value of -8. Consider the conic with this equation. If the coordinate of the foci are this, what is a plus b plus c? Well, an interesting fact about the foci is they're both evenly distanced apart from the center. So if you add up their x values, they're going to average out at the center. So basically, you're looking for the a plus b plus c is equal to 2 times the center value, since it's technically added twice. You can imagine if they've got foci at 0 and 4 and the center at 2, 2 times 2 is equal to 0 plus 4. And then you add your yb value right here. So you got to figure out that information. Well, what you do is you can kind of separate this into parts, divide both of these, 9x squared minus 36x by 9. So you have x squared minus 4x. And then you simplify that to x minus 2 all squared. And that results in an x center of 2, which is multiplied by twice. And then you use the same thing for your y. Divide by -4. Y squared plus 6 converts to 6y, and then you go y plus 3 all squared and get -3. So 2 times 2 plus 3 minus 3 is equal to 1.0. In these cases, if you see a 0.0 answer, it is almost always going to be that answer. 25. Two cables are attached to the vertical point from the ground. Between the cables is 20%. The longer cable is 270 feet long, and the shorter cable is attached to 105 feet below the height of the tower. And finally, the shorter cable. So in this case, you can use our SSA obtuse program, assuming it works for you. You put in the angle, you put in these two sides. Since the angle opposite of B, or the second angle you enter, is 270, you use obtuse, and you get a value of 204. 26, consider an arithmetic sequence in which the 6th term is 47 and the 12th term is 95. What's the product of the 18th and 19th term? So first off, you got to figure out the common difference between them. 47 increases to 95 over 6 terms. So you figure out the common difference by taking the difference between those and dividing by your 6 terms. And you get a common difference of 8. Then you can use that to figure out the 0th term. So -6 times 8 plus your 6th term is -1. And then you simply use that to figure out the product of the 18th and 19th term as shown here. The common difference times the term plus your 0th term. And if you do that, you get 21,593. 27, if this f of x is equal to that, h of x is equal to that, find h of -1 of f of -1 of 1. In this case, you can either actually find the inverse, or more easily, you can go to EQ Solver and figure out at what x value 3x minus 4 over 5x minus 6 is equal to 1. Then once you have that value, you do the same thing for h with your new value. And if you do that, you'll get -13. Okay, 36 for final exams. Mr. Wilcox gave her class a list of 18 study problems. 10 will be on the exam. Amy knows how to correctly solve 16. What is the probability she solves all problems? So in this case, we figure out the number of possibilities of there being 10. The number of possibilities that all questions on the test she's able to solve, or basically what would happen if you distributed 16 problems on the test. Then you also need to figure out the number of ways 18 problems can be distributed on the test. So 16 permutation 10 over 18 permutation 10. And if you put that in your calculator, go to math, then prop, and then NPR. And if you do that, you'll get a value of 0.183. So basically, this is the number of ways that you can have 10 problems she can solve on the test, and this is the number of ways all 18 problems can be on the test. So if you do that, you get 0.183. And let me just confirm something. Okay, it does seem, okay, I guess this kind of makes sense because, yeah, okay, basically, these can be P or they can also be C. So because the C only adds this 10 factorial dividing by each of them, it doesn't matter whether you use combinations or permutations. Combinations probably makes more sense logically. The number of ways 10 problems out of 16 can be on the test over the number of ways 10 problems out of 18 can be on the test. And if you do that, you get 0.183 regardless. Consider an ellipse with these vertices and endpoints of this. What is the eccentricity? Well, you got to figure out the length of each axis. The major axis, as you can see, has a total length of 10. So you divide by 2 to get that radius. Then the minor axis has a length of 4, so you divide by 2 to get that radius. And then you simply do the longer radius squared minus the shorter radius squared, square root of that over the longer radius to find the eccentricity of an ellipse. And if you do that, you get a value of 0.92. Find the area of this triangle with these points. We'll be using our 3D shoelace program. Put the x values into L1, 6, 8, and 6, y values into L2, and z values into L3 on stat edit. Then you use our program, go to polygon, 3 sides, and then do the 3D shoelace to get a value area of 15.4. 39. The directrix of the graph y is equal to h of x is the line y is equal to c. What is the value of c? Well, first off, you'll be using stat edit to put both of these equations into y1 and y2. Once you do that, you realize the a coefficient, or the value next to x squared, is -0.5. So the directrix of that line would be your vertex minus 1 over 4 over the coefficient you got, so -0.5. And if you do that, you get a value of C value of 4.5. This is the equation. Basically, the equation of a focus would be this added. Since it's a directrix is on the bottom, or is the opposite, you subtract it instead. And this is basically the equation for a focus / directrix. If the parabola intersects at those 2 points, AB, what is AB? We'll be using our Oxor program for this problem and the next one. Go to Oxor. We don't need inputs because they'll be at the bounds. And then once you do that, you put in, it will give you a distance of 8.9 and an area of 19.0. Find the arc length of f of x. Well, in this case, the arc length of an equation is the integral from your interval. So integral from 0 of 8 of square root of 1 plus your derivative squared. So basically, integral from 0 to 8 of square root of 1 plus your derivative of the function, all squared. Or, well, not the 1 isn't squared, but the derivative is entirely squared. And then dx. And if you do that, you'll get a value of 13.6. Rectangle is to be inscribed between this graph and the x-axis with the base on the x-axis. What is the maximum area? Well, in this case, the area of a rectangle is your base times your height. So your height is going to be equal to 16 minus x squared, and your width is, or length is 2x because it's dual-sided. You can imagine x can be positive and negative at the maximum point. So you want to figure out when the derivative of that is equal to 0, because the graph of the area will look like this, and as you can see, the derivative is 0 at the maximum. And once you have that, plug in your x value right back into the equation to get 49.3. 44, what's the sum of this series? Well, first off, that you can also just simply like add the first 4 values and then put all these in and figure out which value is reasonably close. And you'll very quickly see the value is A. Alternatively, you could also realize that this is a Maclaurin series. Sine of 2 is equal to your 2 powered to 1 over 1 factorial minus 2 powered to 3 over 3 factorial plus 2 powered to 5 over 5 factorial minus 2 powered to 7 over 7 factorial, etc., where this 2 comes from here. So yeah. Okay. The position of the object in the xy plane is given by the x of t and y of t, and the derivative of those are this. At t equals 0, the position is 8, 4. What is the speed at pi over 6? Well, you can imagine the speed as a vector, the change in x times the squared plus the change in y squared, square root of that. So that's basically what you're doing. The derivative of x, basically plug in t for here, square that, plug in t for here, square that, take the square root, and you will get a speed of 2.09. As you can imagine, the vector like that, or speed vector like that, and then the change in y like that, and then the change in x like that. So yeah, that's why you use Pythagorean theorem, basically. 51, what is the position of the particle? Or what is the y value of the position at least? Well, to counteract a derivative, you take the integral. So you take the integral from 0 to pi over 3 of your change in y, and then you add on your 8, oh yeah, hold up, yeah. Then you add on your original y value of 8. That starts at t equals 0. And if you do that, you get a b value of 9.63. Consider the first quadrant region bounded by the y-axis, this line, and this curve right here. The region is a base of a solid by cross-section, which each cross-section is a square perpendicular to the x-axis. What is the volume of the solid? So you can imagine that for every point, or every x value, there's a square being formed, which is the difference of the two equations. So 10 minus 2 ln of 5 minus x. Since it's a square, your side is squared. So you have a bunch of squares being added together, and you do based on x values infinitesimally small. And to do that, that's essentially the equivalent of an integral to convert it to 3 dimensions. So yeah, integral from 0 to 4 of your 10 minus your 2 ln of 5 minus x, all squared, is your equation for the volume of your cross-section solid. 53, you have a bunch of years, you have a bunch of distances, create a linear regression model, put the x values into L1, y values into L2, linear regression, store in Y1, and you will have an equation that represents the data. So you want to figure out the error in that estimation. So you simply do your new y value of 1951 minus the actual value of 1951 as shown here, and you'll get 1.71 feet. 54, use the date line to predict what it would be in 2022. I'll simply do y1 of that 2022. Assume the mean hang time of a punt for all NFL punters over the season was 4.47 with this standard deviation. If there was a mean time of this for the 2022 season, what percentile did it place him in? So basically, the problem is asking how many people kicked with a hang time of less than or equal to him. So your lower is negative infinity, your higher is your high bound is his hang time, your mean is 4.4, and your standard deviation is 0.4 or 0.25. Do normal CDF of that data, and you will get 95th percentile. If you need to go to normal CDF, go to distribution and go to 2. Go to distribution on your calculator and press 2, basically. 56. Consider random variable x as normally distributed with this mean and the standard deviation. What is the approximate interquartile range? The interquartile range is the 75th percentile minus the 25th percentile. So in other words, it is the center 50% of the data. So inverse norm of 0.5, center, and then mean of 75, standard deviation is 16. Then you simply do the upper bound minus the smaller bound to get 21.6. All right, that is all. I hope you enjoyed. Test took a bit longer than the previous ones. Makes sense because it is a district test, should be a little harder. If you have any questions or need any clarifications, please leave a comment, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my abilities.